In the high-stakes theater of Washington politics, a tactical error of historic proportions recently unfolded on live national television. It was a mistake that few in the Capitol have dared to make in nearly a decade. The decision to launch a deeply personal, unprovoked assault on Senator John Kennedy. As Representative Ilhan Omar stood before the cameras, labeling the Louisiana senator a racist relic, a Louisiana grandpa cosplay, and a corporate lobbyist performing a minstrel show, she appeared to have overlooked a series of critical, biographical details. Senator John Kennedy is not merely a folksy politician with a penchant for country sayings. He is an academic and legal powerhouse. He holds a degree from Vanderbilt University, where he graduated magna cum laude. He earned his Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law, where he served as the editor of the prestigious Virginia Law Review, a publication consistently ranked among the top 10 legal journals in the United States. Furthermore, he attained a Bachelor of Civil Law with first-class honors from Magdalen College, Oxford University. This is the highest academic distinction Oxford awards, reserved for those who demonstrate exceptional mastery of complex legal theory. Before his arrival in the United States Senate, Kennedy spent 30 years practicing law in the rigorous courtrooms of Louisiana. He has spent his entire career waiting for exactly this type of witness to occupy the designated chair and provide him with exactly that much rhetorical rope. Omar, seemingly unaware of this background, believed she had successfully humiliated the senator. Misinterpreting his silence for shock, she smiled at her staff with the confidence of an individual who believed they had delivered a decisive knockout blow on a global stage. Kennedy took a slow, deliberate sip of water. He set the glass down, adjusted his microphone with practiced ease, and looked at Representative Omar with the expression of a veteran hunter who had just watched a target move into a vulnerable, open position. He thanked her for her remarks and requested a few minutes to respond. As the senator noted, in the legal traditions of Louisiana, when an opponent provides a long enough rope, the most professional response is to allow them to experience the consequences of their own overreach. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing officially convened at 10:00 a.m. inside the Dirksen Senate Office Building, Room 226. The subject of the hearing was Foreign Influence in American Elections and Public Institutions, a subject of immense political sensitivity that had attracted full C-SPAN coverage and major network attention. The witness list was a carefully calibrated balance of perspectives. Republican-invited experts from various conservative think tanks provided testimony regarding foreign election interference and systemic immigration fraud. Conversely, Democratic witnesses testified about what they characterized as the weaponization of federal investigations against immigrant populations and communities of color. Representative Ilhan Omar was the marquee witness for the Democratic side. Although she was not a member of the committee herself, she had been invited to testify about the climate of fear she alleged was being created by federal investigations within Minnesota's Somali community. Her presence was deeply strategic. At the time, the Minnesota welfare fraud scandal, specifically the Feeding Our Future case, was expanding toward an estimated $9 billion in misappropriated funds. Additionally, Omar's own complex immigration history was facing renewed scrutiny from the Department of Justice. Her appearance was designed to reframe these legal inquiries not as legitimate investigations into financial and administrative fraud, but as racially motivated attacks on a vulnerable community. Senator John Kennedy sat in his customary seat on the Republican side of the dais, wearing a dark suit and a patterned tie. He maintained a stoic silence during Omar's 10-minute opening statement, taking slow, old-school handwritten notes on a yellow legal pad. When Omar finished, she was met with warm applause from Senators Dick Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse. Following a series of predictable questions from other Republican members, questions regarding the fraud case and past controversial comments, Chairman Chuck Grassley officially recognized Senator Kennedy. Kennedy began with a polite, measured greeting, expressing a desire for a respectful conversation about serious issues. Omar, seeing an opening to assert dominance, delivered a 2-minute pre-planned attack that would soon be recognized as the most strategically disastrous speech of her career. She claimed Kennedy represented everything wrong with the country, accusing him of using an affected down-home accent to hide his status as an elite corporate lobbyist. She called his demeanor a minstrel show and a cosplay intended to make a racist agenda palatable to his base. Her voice rose as she declared that she owed him no answers and that the future of the country would dance on the grave of everything he represented. She leaned back, crossing her arms with the satisfaction of a victor. Digital media was already beginning to trend with hashtags like Ilhan destroys. Kennedy, however, did not react with anger. He did not frown or adopt a defensive posture. He waited for the room to still, took a sip of water, and adjusted his reading glasses. "Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the Congresswoman's candor," Kennedy began. His voice was unruffled, maintaining its characteristic Louisiana cadence. He noted that back in his home state there is a saying, "When somebody gives you a long enough rope, the polite thing to do is let them hang themselves with it." He pointed out that Omar had provided him with an exceptionally long rope, and he intended to see exactly how she had used it. Opening his legal pad, Kennedy revealed that he had counted 9 specific accusations she had made against him in the span of just 2 minutes. He quoted his mother's advice, "If somebody calls you a cow, don't get angry. Ask them if they've ever milked a cow." The room rippled with quiet laughter, and the first sign of uncertainty appeared on Omar's face. Kennedy requested 15 minutes to respond to the 2-minute opening, a request Chairman Grassley immediately granted. "Representative Omar, let's begin with accusation number 1, Kennedy said, tapping his pad. "Your first charge is that I am uneducated and that my manner of speaking is a performance to hide my elite schooling. Am I correct in that assessment of your accusation?" Omar remained silent, staring at him. Kennedy took the silence as confirmation and proceeded to present a series of biographical facts that had clearly been absent from her staff's research. He detailed his graduation from Vanderbilt in 1973 and his tenure as an editor for the University of Virginia Law Review. He emphasized that being an editor at UVA is not a participation trophy. It is a role earned by outperforming the brightest legal minds in the country. He then addressed the Oxford degree, a Bachelor of Civil Law with first-class honors. "You called an Oxford man uneducated, Representative," Kennedy noted, looking over his reading glasses. "Think about the implications of that for a moment." He then contrasted his educational record with hers. He cited her 2011 degree from North Dakota State University in International Studies and Political Science. He acknowledged it as a respectable education from a solid state school, but he highlighted the absurdity of a graduate from North Dakota State calling a first-class honors graduate of Oxford uneducated. He shared a story about a chicken that walked into a courthouse thinking it was a poultry market, delivering the morale. Don't walk into a place you don't belong with the confidence of someone who does. When Omar tried to interrupt, Kennedy held up a single, gentle finger, reminding her that he still had over 14 minutes of his allotted time. He dismissed the first accusation, explaining that while he may talk slow and use country sayings, it is because that is how his family spoke for 6 generations. He noted that he pretends to be simple because it encourages people to underestimate him, a tactic she had just fallen for. Senator Kennedy took another measured sip of water, his composure remaining entirely unshaken as the gravity of the room shifted. He turned a page on his yellow legal pad, the sound of the paper crisp against the silence of the Dirksen building. "Knox, to accusation number 2, he stated, his voice retaining that low, rhythmic drawl. Your second charge, Representative, is that the state of Louisiana was constructed entirely on the backs of enslaved black people, and that I, as its representative, am merely a vessel for that dark legacy. I want to address this with the seriousness it deserves, because history is not a toy to be played with for political points. It is a ledger of human experience." For the first time since the hearing began, the folksy warmth in Kennedy's voice was replaced by a somber, judicial weight. He noted that while slavery was an undeniable and monstrous stain on the history of Louisiana, the Congresswoman's attempt to use it as a localized weapon was historically illiterate. He proceeded to provide a lesson in the broader scope of American history that the witness had apparently bypassed. Kennedy pointed out that slavery in the United States was not a regional anomaly, but a national institution. He detailed how New York City served as the largest slave market in the North, and how Wall Street, the very center of American finance, was partially constructed by enslaved labor. He referenced the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam and the fact that Massachusetts was the primary builder of slave ships, while Rhode Island served as the financial hub for the transatlantic trade. When you single out Louisiana while ignoring the foundations of the very North you represent, Kennedy remarked, you're applying a selective moral standard. If we are to judge individuals based on the historical sins of their states, then we must look at Minnesota. Your state was settled by migrants who built their prosperity on land, seized from the Dakota people through treaties that were systematically broken by your state's founders. Every state in this union has a history that requires atonement. Judging a contemporary man by the historical sins of his ancestors is not a moral position. It is the very definition of bigotry. And you, Representative, should be the first to recognize that. He allowed the weight of the word bigotry to settle over the Democratic side of the dais. He then transitioned to the contemporary reality of the state she had disparaged. He cited the fact that Louisiana is 32% African American, making it one of the most racially diverse states in the nation. He spoke of New Orleans as a cultural and ethnic epicenter of the Western Hemisphere. He reminded the room that Louisiana was the second state in the South to elect an African American to the United States Congress, following the Reconstruction era. We have elected African American mayors, judges, district attorneys, and state legislators for decades, Kennedy noted. He pointedly asked if she was familiar with Cleo Fields, a prominent African American Democrat from Baton Rouge, who served in Congress alongside her own political predecessors. Louisiana elected him, not Minnesota, Louisiana. So when you paint my home with the broad brush of a slave legacy, you are intentionally ignoring the fact that we have done more to integrate our history and elect diverse leadership than many of the so-called progressive states you champion. Kennedy then pivoted to the present-day reality of the Congresswoman's own district, and the tone of the hearing grew markedly sharper. He introduced a specific number into the record: $9 billion. Representative Omar's expression tightened as Kennedy detailed the estimated upper bound of the massive welfare fraud currently under federal investigation in Minnesota. He walked through the Feeding Our Future scandal, which began with a confirmed $250 million in stolen funds, but had expanded through investigative discovery to a potential $9 billion. He noted that 75 defendants had already been indicted, most of whom were members of the Somali community that Omar claimed to represent. "And what was your official response to the federal investigation of this massive theft of children's food?" Kennedy asked, leaning forward. He read from a transcript of her January appearance on Face the Nation, where she characterized the investigation as creating confusion and chaos. "Representative, $9 billion meant to feed hungry children was stolen," Kennedy stated, his voice hardening. "Stolen from the mouths of the very people you represent. And yet, you characterize the pursuit of justice as chaos. I find it fascinating that you are more concerned with the slavery of 2 centuries ago than with the $9 billion stolen from children in your own district last year. That is a highly unusual set of priorities for a self-proclaimed progressive. It is, quite frankly, a moral inversion." He then addressed the political fallout of the scandal, mentioning the resignation of Governor Tim Walz, who had cited the scandal as the reason for ending his political career. Kennedy quoted Walz's statement, "If it's me you want, leave. My people alone." Kennedy pointed out that his people were the ones being robbed by the fraud, and yet Omar had chosen to attack the investigators rather than the thieves. "Representative, have you even been to Louisiana?" Kennedy asked. When she attempted to deflect, he noted her silence as a no. He asked if she had spent any significant time in the African American communities of New Orleans, Baton Rouge, or Shreveport. Again, the answer was silence. "So you have zero direct knowledge of the state you just insulted," Kennedy concluded. "You have no familiarity with its people, its demographics, or its current leadership. Yet you felt qualified to judge an entire population on national television. The definition of prejudice is judgment without knowledge. You prejudged an entire state and its senator based on shallow stereotypes. That is bigotry, Representative. The very thing you accused me of. Accusation number 2. Dismissed." Kennedy turned a page in his pad and addressed the third charge, the claim that his accent was performative or a minstrel show. His voice remained exactly the same, slow, melodic, and distinctly Louisianan. "Representative, this is an accusation of fakery," he said. "You are claiming that I am playing a character to manipulate voters. This is a serious charge of professional and personal misconduct." He then shared the history of his family to provide the necessary context. He spoke of his mother, a schoolteacher from Zachary, Louisiana, who spoke with the same slow cadence and soft vowels. He spoke of his father, born in Mississippi, and his grandfather, a Methodist preacher in the tiny town of Glen, population 200. "I talk the way I talk because my family has spoken this way for 6 generations in this land," Kennedy declared, looking directly at Omar. "My accent is not a performance. It is an inheritance. You just accused me of performing my own mother's heritage. Think about that for a moment." He then invited her to consider an analogy. He reminded the room that she had arrived in the United States as a refugee from Somalia at age 12, that she spoke English with a distinct accent, and that she wore a hijab as a public expression of her faith and heritage. "You bring Somali culture into the United States Congress, and you speak openly about your background," Kennedy noted. "No one worthy of the title American would ever accuse you of performing Somali culture or having a fake immigrant persona. Such an accusation would be rightly condemned as ugly bigotry, and yet you just did exactly that to me. You judged a culture you don't understand and dismissed a heritage you have never encountered. You did it with the absolute certainty of someone who believes her own identity is real while everyone else's is theater. Kennedy put his reading glasses back on and looked at her pointedly. The most ironic aspect of your accusation is that I am sitting here speaking with the authentic voice of my parents, while you, who have been in this country for 30 years, still carry your own accent. Your accent is beautiful, and it is authentic. You aren't criticized for it, and you shouldn't be. Because accents are heritage, not performance. That is the fundamental truth you forgot when you decided my life was a minstrel show. Accusation number 3, dismissed. The senator then moved to the 4th accusation, the claim that he was a corporate lobbyist who protected the interests of the wealthy. He smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a man who knew the facts were entirely on his side. This is a specific, entirely invented charge, Kennedy began. He walked through his 40-year career, beginning with his practice of law in Louisiana, which focused on commercial litigation and appellate work. He then detailed his 16 years as the elected state treasurer of Louisiana, a position he held for 4 consecutive terms. As state treasurer, my job was to manage $20 billion in financial assets, including the pension funds for our state employees, Kennedy explained. I was responsible for the retirement savings of teachers, firefighters, police officers, and nurses. I was elected by the people of Louisiana, not appointed by a corporation. I have never been a registered lobbyist. I have never worked for a lobbying firm. I have never taken a dime from a corporation to advocate for their interests. That is simply not what I have done with my life. He then revealed the results of his research into the Congresswoman's own financial record, creating a stark contrast. He introduced the name of her husband, Tim Minott, and his firm, the E Street Group. He noted that during the 2020 election cycle, Omar's congressional campaign had paid her husband's firm nearly $3 million in donor funds. Hard-working people gave you money thinking they were supporting a progressive movement, Kennedy stated. Instead, that money was routed directly into a consulting firm owned by your spouse. The Federal Election Commission eventually ordered your campaign to amend its filings because of this arrangement. That is a matter of public record. He further detailed how those funds were then invested into cannabis businesses and wineries, some of which were now embroiled in lawsuits where business partners alleged that $1.7 million had simply vanished from the accounts. So, let us compare our records, Kennedy suggested. I have a 40-year career in public service with 0 allegations of financial misconduct. You have a documented history of campaign finance irregularities and a family business arrangement that required FEC intervention. When you point your finger at me and cry corruption, you have 3 fingers pointing directly back at you. In psychology, they call that projection. Perhaps if you had studied the human mind instead of international studies, you would have recognized the pattern in yourself. Kennedy paused, looking at her with a mixture of disappointment and pity. I have to ask, Representative, when you decided to attack a senior member of this committee on live television, did you assume I was too polite to respond? Or did you simply assume I was too stupid to know the facts? Because you were wrong on both counts. Accusation number 4, dismissed. Senator Kennedy briefly closed his yellow legal pad and looked over his reading glasses at Representative Omar. The room was heavy with the silence of a systematic dismantling. He reopened the pad to the final section, signaling that he was about to address the crescendo of her opening attack. Representative, your final accusation is the one I find the most intriguing, and it is the one I want to close with, Kennedy stated, his voice returning to a steady, even rhythm. You declared, with a great deal of theatrical flair, that my time is ending. You announced that a reckoning is coming for everything I represent, and that the future will dance on my grave. That is intensely dramatic rhetoric. It made me genuinely wonder whose time is actually ending in this scenario. He turned a page and began a methodical audit of her recent political and legal standing. Let us examine your current record, he proposed. You were recently removed from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. While the vote was initiated by Republicans, a sufficient number of your fellow Democrats agreed that you lost your seat. The documented reasons were your comments regarding the Benjamins, your accusations of dual loyalty against American Jews, and your characterization of Jewish students at Columbia University as pro-genocide. Following this, you were formally censured by the House of Representatives, one of the most severe institutional punishments available short of expulsion. You stood in the well of the House as the resolution condemning your behavior was read aloud. Kennedy did not raise his voice. He merely recited the facts with the clinical precision of a prosecutor entering exhibits into evidence. Currently, the Department of Justice is investigating your complex immigration history. The Department of Homeland Security is actively pulling your files. Tom Homan, the administration's border czar, publicly stated on national television that one of the top fraud investigators in the agency is reviewing your case personally. The House Oversight Committee is scrutinizing your family's finances. Your state's governor resigned over a $9 billion fraud scandal that centered heavily on the very community you represent in Congress, a scandal you chose to dismiss as chaos rather than an outright theft of children's resources. He then introduced a final, devastating metric: prediction markets, venues where individuals wager real capital on political outcomes, currently rank you among the top 5 members of the United States Congress most likely to face federal indictment before the 2026 midterm elections. Kennedy, set the legal pad down. So, Representative, with all due respect, and unlike your use of the phrase, I actually mean it, whose time is ending here? He offered a brief summary of his own standing to provide the necessary contrast. I am 73 years old. I hold a 62% approval rating in the state of Louisiana. The citizens of my state have elected me to this office 3 consecutive times. They know me, and they have known my family for generations. If I were to announce a campaign for a 4th term tomorrow, I would win comfortably. My time in public life, if anything, is expanding. You, on the other hand, are 43 years old, under multiple federal investigations, stripped of your committee assignments, formally censured by your peers, and facing a formidable primary challenge while your constituents watch billions of dollars vanish in a massive fraud scheme. He paused, and for the first time in 15 minutes, his voice carried something distinct from folksy warmth. It was the quiet, undeniable authority of a seasoned statesman delivering a hard truth to a novice. Back home in Louisiana, we have a story, Kennedy began, settling into the narrative like a practiced storyteller. There was a small frog sitting on a rock in a pond, enjoying the warmth of the sun. A large blue heron came walking through the shallows. The frog looked up at the heron and yelled, "Heron, you think you're better than me because you have long legs? Well, your time is ending. A reckoning is coming for birds like you." Kennedy paused for a beat, allowing the imagery to set. The heron looked down at the frog for a long moment. He was real calm and real patient. Another deliberate pause. And then he ate him. The hearing room was absolutely still. The metaphor was brutally clear, and the execution was flawless. "The moral of that story, Representative," Kennedy said softly, leaning forward, "and I strongly suggest you heed it. When you are very small in the grand scheme of things, you probably shouldn't shout at things that are very large that their time is ending, because they might not react the way you hope." Representative Omar leaned abruptly toward her microphone, her voice noticeably higher and tighter than it had been during her aggressive opening remarks. "Mr. Chairman," she interjected, "I am requesting an immediate recess. This has become—" Kennedy smoothly turned his attention to Chairman Grassley. "Mr. Chairman, I note that I have 3 minutes of my allotted time remaining. I would like to utilize them, if it pleases the committee." Chairman Grassley nodded firmly. Senator Kennedy retains the floor. Omar's request for a reprieve hung awkwardly in the air. She had publicly asked for an escape route and had been summarily denied. Kennedy turned back to the witness. "Representative, I will be brief," he said, closing the legal pad for the final time. "You arrived at this hearing today with the explicit intention of launching a personal attack against me. I understand the nature of modern politics. However, when you decided to attack, you chose to attack everything, not just my political positions, but my identity, my regional accent, my heritage, my parents, my education, and my integrity. That was a catastrophic tactical error." He explained the rules of engagement she had violated. When you attack everything a person is, you grant them permission to defend everything they are. And when the person you attack has the material to defend a first-class Oxford education, 40 years of unblemished public service, a clean financial record, and the patience to dismantle your arguments slowly, the confrontation becomes something entirely different than what you anticipated. "Your accusations against me have been thoroughly addressed and categorically dismissed," Kennedy concluded. "My statements regarding you, the anti-Semitism, the campaign finance violations, the massive Minnesota fraud, and the active federal investigations remain on the record, and they are fully documented. So, when you leave this room today, I suggest you consider a question. It is not my question. It is the question your constituents are asking, the question the Department of Justice is asking, and the question every American watching this broadcast is asking." He looked at her with unwavering intensity. "Ilhan Omar, who are you? Not the carefully crafted character you perform for the media, not the narrative you sell to your donors, but who are you, really, when the official records are released, the files are pulled, and the absolute truth is known? I know exactly who I am. I am the son of a Louisiana schoolteacher and a Mississippi farmer. I am an Oxford-educated attorney. I am a 3-term United States Senator. I am a man who speaks like his mother because she taught him to. Do you know who you are?" He allowed a final moment of silence. "Because based on your decision to spend 2 minutes attacking me with charges that were entirely false, it is abundantly clear that you do not." Kennedy leaned back. "I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman." The silence in the hearing room stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Chairman Grassley looked at the witness table. "Representative Omar, do you wish to respond to the senator's remarks?" Omar opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. She turned frantically to a staffer seated directly behind her and whispered something urgent. The staffer leaned in and whispered back. When she finally spoke into the microphone, her voice was strained. "Mr. Chairman, I formally request a 10-minute recess. I need to consult with legal counsel." Grassley granted the request, and the committee stood in recess. Omar rose from the table with visible haste, not quite running, but moving significantly faster than when she had entered the room. Her staff quickly gathered her documents and flanked her as she briskly walked toward the corridor leading to the private consultation rooms, the cameras tracking her every step. The 10-minute recess stretched into 30 minutes. 30 minutes eventually became an hour. Finally, Omar's chief of staff appeared in the hearing room and approached the chairman's dais for a brief, inaudible conversation. The chief of staff then walked over to the cluster of waiting reporters. "Representative Omar will not be returning to the hearing today," the staffer announced. "She has been unexpectedly taken ill. Her office will submit written answers to any remaining committee questions." The announcement was met first with stunned silence and then with a flurry of activity, as reporters scrambled to file their stories. Chairman Grassley officially adjourned the hearing, and the cameras turned off. Kennedy calmly gathered his papers, nodded politely to his colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and received an inscrutable nod from Senator Durbin, a professional acknowledgement of a historic rhetorical victory. As Kennedy exited into the hallway, he was swarmed by the press. Reporters shouted questions about the optics of the exchange and whether he regretted the personal nature of his response. Kennedy paused, smiled his trademark polite smile, and offered a final thought. "Folks, as we say in Louisiana, some people believe they can say anything they want, as long as nobody pushes back on them. Today, somebody decided to push back. Y'all have a good afternoon." He then walked away. The footage of Omar requesting a recess and failing to return went viral within minutes. However, unlike most viral political moments that fade quickly, Kennedy's 15-minute response became a lasting cultural and educational artifact. Within a week, law school professors across the country were requesting permission to use the footage in their trial advocacy courses. It was hailed as a masterclass in deliberate cross-examination, demonstrating how to establish a frame, use an opponent's overreach against them, and dismantle a hostile witness without ever raising one's voice or providing them an opportunity to play the victim. The political impact was equally profound. Within 2 weeks, Omar's primary challenger had raised an unprecedented $4.2 million in small-dollar donations. The progressive media, which typically offered her a reflexive defense, began a slow and careful distancing. Her fellow squad members notably declined to comment on the hearing for several news cycles. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice investigation accelerated, and the House Oversight Committee successfully passed a motion to subpoena her immigration records, with several Republicans who had previously hesitated now voting in favor. For Senator Kennedy, the response elevated his status from a popular regional politician to a national conservative icon. His alma maters, Vanderbilt, UVA, and Oxford, issued statements acknowledging his achievements, and his approval rating in FIDE's Louisiana surged to 71%. When a local journalist later asked if he had prepared his response in advance, Kennedy laughed warmly. "Prepared? I prepared for that response for 73 years. It's called living a life you don't have to apologize for." In a senior center in Shreveport, Louisiana, an 82-year-old retired schoolteacher named Beatrice Thibodeau watched the hearing unfold. She had taught at the first integrated elementary school in Caddo Parish in the 1960s, enduring severe racial hostility because her students needed her. When she heard Omar describe Louisiana as a state built solely on slavery, Beatrice laughed quietly. "Sweetheart, you don't know a thing about Louisiana," she told the television screen. When Kennedy listed the state's diversity and defended his accent, she nodded approvingly. "That's right, Johnny. You tell her." When Omar fled the hearing, Beatrice didn't gloat. She merely sighed with the weary recognition of a teacher watching a student fail a test they could have easily prepared for. "Sweetheart," she said to the empty room, "when you don't know the answer, you don't ask the question. That's the first lesson I ever taught in my classroom. Maybe you'll learn it now." She turned off the television, satisfied that the truth had prevailed over the noise. This historic confrontation serves as a permanent reminder of the power of preparation, education, and patience. When a politician arrives armed only with insults and a rehearsed narrative, they are profoundly vulnerable. To an opponent armed with a clean record and verified facts, in the end, Ilhan Omar came to attack, and John Kennedy came to respond. Only one of them possessed the fortitude to stay in the room. As the saying goes in Louisiana, sometimes the rope is indeed much longer than you anticipate.